Howdy viewer, my name is Diego Armando Serna, and I am excited to present and discuss with you the role of culture in education. Culture and education are things that surround our lives, yet their influence on us may not be evident at first. This presentation will allow us to take a step back so we can see the dynamics between them. Now, first, let us begin by defining culture. The word itself is quite broad and nebulous, for it entails a variety of components that collectively contribute to the concept of culture itself. This includes abstract concepts such as values, customs, attitudes, beliefs, to concrete things such as food, arts, and clothing. All of these components give shape and definition to a culture, from a society as a whole all the way down to the individual. For the purposes of this presentation, we shall distill the broad concept of culture into two essential components: beliefs and customs. Beliefs being the prominent ideas and values of a group, and customs, which are the practices that embody those beliefs. Next, let us define education. Just like culture, education itself is a sphere that is comprised of a multitude of components that all interact directly and indirectly with one another to varying degrees. It involves immediate components such as the student, teachers, and administrators, to indirect components such as the family, friends, mass media, and so on. All these components in one way or another influence the sphere of education. With that said, we can now begin to answer exactly how something as large and abstract as society and culture as a whole influence education. To understand how the wider culture and society trickle down to influence the student, let us take Urie Bronfenbrenner's theory and model of social ecological systems. It outlines and stratifies different levels of a society and how they all interact with one another, from the most fundamental component, the individual, to the broadest component, the society as a whole. Let's examine the model by working outside inward. The macrosphere consists of the society's widely held values and beliefs, with the practices and customs that embody them. The exosystem is the social settings and contexts where interactions between people take place, such as home, school, the university, courthouses, and just to name a few. The mesosphere involves the interactions between other members of the microsphere, such as parents meeting with teachers and a teacher discussing school management with the principal. And lastly, we have the microsphere, which is the student's direct and immediate interactions and relationships with other members of the group, whether it be with their family, friends, teachers, administrators, and so on. All the lower spheres exist within the context and influence of the macrosphere. The beliefs and customs of the macrosphere give purpose to social settings and contexts that people of the culture participate in. Thus, those who are directly involved in those settings and contexts embody and perpetuate the culture of the larger society by participating in these settings and contexts, eventually integrating those values into their own behavior. When the individual participates and involves themselves with those people and those settings, the individual will themselves come to embody their culture. In turn, they perpetuate the culture through their participation and modification of their thought process and behaviors in order to align with their respective culture. So I've provided a general principle of how culture influences social settings, but how does it influence the educational setting of the classroom? Well, in his essay titled Psychocultural Variables and Constants, Effects on Teaching and Learning in School, Ronald G. Tharp states, "A central task of educational design is to make the organization of teaching, learning, and performance compatible with the social structures in which students are most productive, engaged, and likely to learn." In other words, educational settings and approaches are tailored in ways that allow for optimal learning for students in a given culture. Because students reflect and embody the values of their culture, a teacher will be inclined to generate assignments and take approaches where those values can be fostered and promoted. Let us use a real-world example to demonstrate how this dynamic operates, how the beliefs and customs of a culture manifest in students. For instance, Hawaiian cultures emphasize the importance of collaboration and cooperation. Lin Okagaki highlights that this general belief manifests in the way that children play with one another. She observed that when students learned in groups as opposed to learning individually, overall student performance improved. In this instance, the belief and practice of collaboration and cooperation is embodied by the students, who integrate it into their behaviors and thought process. To use another real-world example, in Eugene E. Garcia's essay titled Hispanic Children, Theoretical, Empirical, and Related Policy Issues, the results of the research suggested that Hispanic students prefer participating cooperatively and do not prefer participation that is competitive. This is most likely because Hispanic cultures tend to value beliefs and practices of loyalty, especially among family members and friends, as Sadie Dingfelder observed. Our final example comes from social psychologist Richard Nisbat's book, The Geography of Thought, in where he compares and contrasts the thinking patterns and thought processes between Western countries and Asia. He analyzes how Asian and Westerners mentally orient themselves to the outside world. Nisbat observed that Asians typically think holistically, in that they see the world as an interconnecting relationship between things, while Westerners, on the other hand, mentally orient themselves and different kinds of objects as things that are separate and distinct from one another. Nisbat highlighted that by the time the children develop a firm grasp of language, they have also learned to speak and think in alignment with in the manner of orientation of their respective countries. As we can see in each of these examples, there are beliefs and values that are upheld and perpetuated by the culture as a whole, which manifest in the behaviors and tendencies of students. The culture influences the classroom by shaping the manner in which the teachers, administrators, and policymakers in the sphere of education approach and orientate education. Teachers, more especially, perpetuate the culture by shaping their lesson plans in ways that reflect the predominant values of their culture. For instance, teachers of cultures that promote collectivism, as we saw in the example of Hawaiian cultures, may be more inclined to assign students with tasks that require cooperation, which in turn fosters cooperative traits among the students. By engaging in these assignments or activities, students participate in and eventually integrate the values of their culture into their thought processes, and behaviors. This concludes my presentation. Before you are the sources which I have cited in this presentation. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure researching this topic and constructing this presentation. Farewell, best wishes, and gig 'em.